Thanks everyone for joining us today to this lunchtime session on having your say, responding to the National Carer Strategy consultation. My name is Grace Turrington and I work in the policy and research team here at Carers New South Wales. It's fantastic to have so many of you join us to this session, but just before I start the session proper, I wanted just to cover off two items. The first is that this session is being recorded for other people to join at a later date or for you to review again after this session ends. And the other is just to reiterate that this session is really focused on giving you all the information about the various consultation opportunities that are currently available in association with the strategy, and all the ways that you can kind of provide feedback and help shape the strategy. And it's not an actual consultation opportunity for you to provide feedback on. But before we get started into the session, I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from where we're all joining from today. I'm presenting to you on Gadigal land in Sydney's inner west. And I would also like to begin by paying my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people who might be joining us in today's session. So I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with who Carers New South Wales is and the work that we do. But for those of you who aren't, we are the peak non-government organisation for carers in New South Wales. And we're part of the national network of carer organisations and a member of Carers Australia. And our vision is an Australia that values and supports all carers. So as I mentioned, this session is about responding to the various consultation opportunities that are available to carers such as yourselves in relation to the National Carer Strategy. And so this session will really cover what the National Carer Strategy is, the development of the National Carer Strategy, as well as the current opportunities that are available to you to get involved. Why have your say? And then the second part of this session will kind of be looking at preparing your response, lodging your submissions or feedback, and providing feedback outside of consultation opportunities and accessing support. And before I continue as well, I've got two screens in front of me, so I will try my best to monitor the chat and see if there's any hands that are raised in the session. But if I don't get to you, I'm sure Melissa or one of my colleagues will just kind of prompt me to let you know that there's people wanting to share feedback or ask a question. But let's continue on, just really quickly covering off what the National Carer Strategy is. And it's first important to note that this isn't the first National Carer Strategy. There was one that was released in 2011. And since that has kind of come to an end, it was announced in October 2024 by Minister for Social Services, the Honourable Amanda Rishworth, that the government intends to develop and implement a National Carer Strategy. And the strategy really aims to recognise the contribution of carers to the community, but to also provide a national coordinated approach to improving recognition and support for carers across Australia. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar already with what a government strategy is, but for any of you who are less familiar, it's essentially a commitment from government to act on a particular issue and identifies what a government wants to change in relation to an issue or a particular idea. And so it then really sets an agenda for how a problem or an idea will be solved or achieved, but also seeks to enable a coordinated approach between various government organisations and agencies, and also outlines who will be involved and what their roles and responsibilities are. And it essentially kind of creates accountability for governments who might say that they have a particular goal they want to achieve or want to solve a particular issue. It just kind of keeps them accountable to what they want to do in relation to those ideas or issues. Now, just really quickly, some examples of existing government strategies that you might already be aware of is the New South Wales Carer Strategy that was announced and released in 2020. That's a 10-year strategy. There's also the National Disability Strategy that was established in 2021. And then back in New South Wales, there's the New South Wales Seniors Strategy. Cool. So just really quickly now, taking you through developing the National Carer Strategy and what's kind of been involved so far. So we know that they want to really speak directly with carers to help shape the focus and the goal of the strategy. And so far, you may have been familiar that there's been a series of in-person and online consultations. A lot of them have been facilitated by Deloitte, the consultancy firm, but we also know that Carers Australia has been delivering or kind of holding their own consultations in each of the states and territories that carer organisations have been supporting in. But an additional layer to consultations so far is attached to this recently released discussion paper. And the purpose of the discussion paper is to effectively add an additional layer of consultation of carers and other interested stakeholders to kind of hear from them directly about how they think the National Carer Strategy should look, but also to make sure that their voices are kind of included in that point of consultation in this stage of development. So the discussion paper so far, the discussion paper was released and it aims to prompt discussion and input from carers across Australia. And it aims to support a diverse range of carers to get involved and share their feedback and their experiences. And it also looks to better understand carer experiences and needs, but also seeks carer input on current challenges and future opportunities to improve recognition and support. So what this discussion paper is really is kind of collating all of the information that the government knows about carer issues and the experiences of carers, but it's also wanting to open it up to the carer community to make sure that what they think they know is kind of accurate, but also if there's anything else that they should know, that they want to give the opportunity to carers to kind of relay that feedback to them. So the next few slides, I'm just going to speak to what's inside the discussion paper. I'll cover off in fairly high level detail section 1 and section 2, and there's been a little bit of time taking you through the third section. But this slide here basically sets out the first 2 sections of the discussion paper. You have section 1, which is effectively a bit of a preamble for the purpose of the National Carer Strategy and the reasons for a new one. And it also looks at the scope and considerations, including specific carer groups and areas of government that should be involved. Section 2 is really starting to build on what that previous section was looking at in terms of the current understandings of carer experiences, service needs and issues, including carer wellbeing and access to services. And it's also looking at experiences of specific carer cohorts, including First Nation carers, CALD carers, young carers, and LGBTQA+ carers. So they're the first kind of 2 sections of the discussion paper. The third section is really where carers are asked to share their experiences and feedback on a range of areas. And these areas in part kind of filter back or are based on these first 2 sections, where they kind of set the framework for the questions that you can be asked in the specific areas that I'll speak to now. So the first kind of area that's mentioned is the structure and overall approach. So key principles of the strategy, as well as your own priorities as a carer, including the biggest barriers and opportunities that you might be experiencing, as well as the diversity of caring roles and the need for targeted approaches that meet the needs of different carer cohorts. And then this next slide kind of also consolidates all the different areas that the discussion paper is looking at. Just to full disclosure, this isn't in direct kind of order. We've just kind of collated them all together. And within each of these sections, or areas rather, there are individual questions that kind of prompt further discussion. But the other key areas or domains of support includes support for carers, including what services you have access to or the challenges you currently experience accessing services, respite, employment and education, peer support, payments, which also includes carer payment or other financial payments that carers may be accessing, and then other services, including emergency support or assistance. So they're the kind of areas that the discussion paper has identified as key areas that they want to explore. But there's also another section where you are very, very welcome to also articulate or identify other issues that might not be kind of covered in these key areas here. Cool. So the next part of this webinar is kind of looking at responding to the National Carer Strategy discussion paper and what you might like to consider when you are developing your response. But I want to begin by this slide first, and as it kind of steps out the opportunities that engaging in consultation in relation to the strategy, but also consultations generally, where you can share your experiences as a carer, but you can also raise issues or concerns about things that are not working the way they should be or the way that they were intended to be, and also make proposed changes for how you think that they could work even better. You can also make recommendations about how things might, about new solutions to existing problems, or again, how to improve things that are kind of might be working a little bit, but could actually be really, really improved with a few different approaches or different considerations. It's also an opportunity to have your needs met. And while we really acknowledge that change can be slow in these contexts where the government might be seeking your feedback, it is nonetheless an opportunity for you to identify issues that might be relevant to you or quite personal to you in a way to promote change and improvement for services and systems that you regularly engage with, as well as other carers. So now looking at how to respond in practical terms, the Department of Social Services is accepting written submissions until the 13th of September 2024. And submissions in this context is actually quite wide. It could mean written, audio, or visual submissions, but there's also an opportunity to respond to a questionnaire. So there's actually a number of ways for you to provide feedback in this context. And I believe Melissa will be sharing the links to all those relevant pages in the chat with you. And you can also, if you prefer to write a written submission or a different submission, you can also upload those submissions via the DSS engagement portal, or you can email directly the National Carer Strategy Consultation email address, or if you prefer to even post your submission, I've included the address on this slide, but we can also provide you that information once this concludes. So these next few slides here, we've included them in this slide deck just as ways to kind of act as helpful prompts that you may want to use when you're developing your own response. And so there's no hard and fast way of developing your own submission, and we hope this slide will kind of be helpful in demonstrating that. So you can develop a longer written submission or response, or a video response, or a survey response. And I think one part of this next slide it's really worthwhile noting is whether you want to respond to the discussion paper questions or whether you simply want to write an open response. Because there are discussion questions does not mean that you have to respond to them all. You can respond to a few, or as we say here, you can just respond in an open response where it can just be a simple letter describing the key issues for you as a carer and what you would like to see included in the strategy or improved more generally. It's not uncommon, while it's not uncommon for individual responses, we also know that lots of people might want to develop a submission together and submit that as a group, or whether you're supporting or contributing to an organisation's response. And lastly, just some food for thought essentially, is whether you want to make a public or confidential response. So typically in these contexts, there is the option for your submission to remain public or confidential, so you can have your personal information redacted. All of those things are for you to consider when you are developing a response. But I guess it's also as a way of kind of showing you that there's lots of different ways that you can provide your feedback, and you can remain as anonymous as you prefer, or you can have your name attached to your submission. So this next slide here, and for anyone who's done carer rep training, you might be familiar with this slide as well, but it's a helpful prompt that we have included in a couple of these having your say sessions, as it can be helpful in that overall preparation of your response. And it kind of might be helpful for you to kind of have these questions in the back of your mind when you're first kind of writing or thinking about what you want to say. So in terms of your preparing your response, you might want to consider identifying who you are talking to and what they can do about the issues or the concerns that you want to raise. Second to that, it can be helpful to, before you start writing, just to identify the key issues that you want to raise in the context of this consultation. And while certainly evidence is not necessary to be included with your submission, it can be helpful to think of examples or evidence that can support your argument. And I guess for the purpose of this session as well, it's really important to highlight that evidence can be your lived experience. And I think we've really seen that highlighted through the recent inquiry into carer recognition, where the lived experiences of carers was added as evidence in various hearings. So I think it really highlights that the individual lived experience that you might put forward can be actually submitted as evidence, and is equal to any other empirical evidence that might be included in other submissions. Next is consider. And when we talk about consider, it can be helpful to kind of split that out into three parts or questions. And that's first is what hat you're wearing, whether you're kind of responding to the consultation as a private citizen or a carer or in another context, but also consider being respectful, but also the privacy and confidentiality considerations of yourself, but also the person that you care for. And that last piece to develop. So frame your issues and experiences using the discussion paper. And it can be helpful but not necessary to follow correct wording and writing conventions, and proofread your work carefully. And so just to finish on these last few slides, and kind of further to that previous slide in communicating policy issues, I won't read this slide entirely, but it can be really helpful to consider what are the key points that you want to raise in this consultation. And you can see these prompt questions here really do kind of feed back into some of these initial points that I raised on this slide here. And we'd be happy to send this information once we finish the session. And so next is kind of getting to the exciting time of lodging your submission. So once you've kind of gone through the process of finalising your submission, it's good to go, happy to send it to the department. But you experience some issues or some concerns, there are different avenues that you can engage to kind of get some resolution or some help with that. Primarily, the department can be contacted via email, but they do have numbers relative to this particular inquiry that we can also provide you. But I also wanted to flag that if you are concerned that you won't get your submission submitted by the deadline, you are very welcome to contact the department and request an extension. Um, we do that. We've done that in the past with submissions as an organisation. So it can't ever hurt to kind of get in contact and request from the department if you need an extension. If you're really looking forward to making a submission. So just to kind of finish off on these last two slides, beyond consultations, obviously we know that various consultation opportunities like the one associated with the National Carer Strategy is a fantastic way to kind of highlight key issues that carers might experience. There are other ways outside of those formal opportunities for carers to provide feedback to government about carer recognition or other carer issues. And these include writing or engaging with your local member or the relevant minister to a particular service or portfolio, engaging with campaigns or raising awareness, participating in committees or advisory groups, or even in research. And the last two are kind of shameless plugs for our own programs and initiatives. Number one is the Care Representation Program, which is a fantastic network of volunteers who are carers, who really support in the systemic advocacy of our organisation. And we'd be happy to provide you with more information about that program if you're interested. And the next is a policy advice form, which is basically an open form that the policy team has available 24/7 for carers, for organisations to kind of raise any policy issues that they think is worthwhile for us to know about. And generally speaking, any issue that a carer raises with us is worthwhile for us to know about. And we can provide that information, that link to the policy advice form in the chat as well. I'm conscious of time and I want to have a little bit of time for questions at the end, but I did want to just to finish on this last slide here about getting support. And it's really important that we actually end on this slide, because we know that sharing your experiences can be really challenging or even emotional at times. And it's important that you prioritize looking after yourself and acknowledging where you might be reaching your limit when you're talking about issues that are quite personal to you. So we have some support, some numbers listed on the screen. But if you ever need specific support, we also have our numbers on our website. We have Carer Gateway and all the numbers listed there. But I do want to finish up with enough time for us to ask questions. So I'll end the presentation and stop sharing my screen so we can take any questions if we'd like. Any questions? I know I fully realize that I've just been speaking at you fairly intently for almost 30 minutes now. But I thought I would also just say that if no questions come to you immediately, but you do have some kind of general questions about the strategy generally, the policy team is really happy to kind of answer any questions that you may have. And I've just received from my colleague that a question about what Deloitte will be addressing in their consultations. That's actually a really good question. I'm not entirely across what each individual consultation is covering in terms of the questions, but I would imagine that it's the intent that each layer of consultation is intended to be complementary and also ensure that carers are being asked similar questions at each point of consultation. But I don't know if the same level of detail is, in terms of questions, is included at each consultation, just given the sheer nature of like the length of time that they have dedicated to those consultations. But we would be happy to take that on notice and follow up as well. Are there any other questions? Feel free to utilise the chat, or you can direct message Carers New South Wales admin, or even come off mute and ask a question as well. Thank you, Kimberly. Well, if there are no other questions from this session, I'm happy for others to stay on the line for another minute or so, but we can also end the session there. Like I said, we'll be making the recording available for you to watch at a later date, or for anyone who registered but couldn't attend this session, that will be available for them. So if there's no other questions, we can wrap that session up. And like I said, if you have any general inquiries about the strategy or the consultation opportunity, please feel free to contact policy. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending, and all the best with your submissions.
Thank you.
Thank you.